The evening crowd filled the small cafe with noise. Cups clinked against saucers. Spoons stirred sugar into hot tea. A group of college students laughed loudly near the window. Soft music played from hidden speakers, but no one was really listening to it. It was just background sound, like the hum of traffic outside. Near the entrance, the glass door opened slowly. A cool breeze slipped in first, followed by a thin teenage girl wearing a faded sweater and worn shoes. She paused just inside the doorway, as if deciding whether she should step further or turn back. Some people glanced at her for a second, then looked away. She did not look like the usual customers. Her hair was tied back in a simple knot. She carried an old cloth bag over her shoulder. It looked light, almost empty. Her face showed tiredness, but her eyes were calm. Not angry, not ashamed, just steady. She walked toward the counter where the cafe owner stood counting change. He was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a habit of judging people quickly. When he noticed her standing there quietly, he sighed before she even spoke. "Yes?" he asked, not unkindly but not warmly either. Her voice was soft but clear. "Sir, may I play for a piece of meal?" For a second, he didn't understand. "Play what?" She pointed gently toward the corner of the cafe. There, against the wall, stood an old upright piano. It had been there for years. Most people thought it was just decoration. Once in a while, a child would press a few random keys, making unpleasant noise before a parent pulled them away. The piano was rarely used for real music. The cafe owner blinked. "You want to play that?" She nodded. "If you allow me." By now, a few customers nearby had started listening. One of the college students snorted. "This is going to be good," he whispered to his friends. They chuckled. Another customer leaned back in his chair, curious. "Let her try," he said casually, as if it were some kind of small entertainment. The owner looked at the girl from head to toe. Her clothes were simple. Her shoes were dusty. She didn't look like someone who had ever taken music lessons. "You can play one song," he said finally. "If it sounds nice, I'll give you something to eat." She bowed her head slightly. "Thank you." As she walked toward the piano, light laughter followed her. Someone even clapped slowly in a joking way. A few people took out their phones, expecting something funny to record. She reached the piano bench and stood there for a moment. Up close, the piano looked older than it did from far away. The wood was scratched. A few keys were slightly yellowed. One corner had a small crack. She gently placed her bag on the floor beside the bench. Before sitting down, she ran her fingers lightly across the top of the piano, as if greeting an old friend. Then she pulled the bench a little closer and sat down slowly. The room was still noisy. Cups clinked. Laughter continued. No one had gone quiet yet. Most people expected a few wrong notes, maybe a broken melody. She closed her eyes for a brief second and placed her fingers on the keys. The first note rang out. It was soft, but it was clean, clear, not hesitant. A few heads turned. Her fingers moved again. The second note joined the first, then a third. Within moments, a gentle melody began to form. It was not random. It was not childish. It was careful. The college students near the window stopped laughing, but they were still smiling, waiting for a mistake. Her hands began to move more freely now. Left hand steady, right hand dancing lightly across the higher keys. The melody grew stronger. It carried emotion that did not match her simple appearance. The cafe owner's eyebrows slowly lifted. The conversations in the room began to fade, not because anyone asked for silence, but because people found themselves listening without meaning to. She was no longer just pressing keys. She was telling something through the music. Her back was straight, her shoulders relaxed, her fingers curved naturally, as if they had known the piano for many years. She did not look nervous. She did not look like someone begging for food. She looked like someone who belonged there. The melody shifted into something deeper. A low, warm sound filled the cafe. It felt almost like a quiet story unfolding. A story of long days, empty streets, and hope that refused to disappear. One of the older customers, who had been reading a newspaper, slowly lowered it. The college students were no longer smiling. The cafe owner leaned against the counter, arms crossed, but his expression had changed. He was no longer watching her with doubt. He was studying her with surprise. Outside, cars continued to pass. People walked by, unaware of what was happening inside. Her fingers moved faster now, but still controlled. Each note landed exactly where it should. She was not showing off. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was simply playing. A young child sitting with her mother tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, she's really good," the child whispered. The mother nodded quietly. The girl at the piano seemed lost in the music. For a moment, the cafe was no longer a busy shop. It felt like a small concert hall. Then, just as the melody reached a gentle peak, she softened it again. The notes became light, almost fragile, like the last rays of sunlight before evening turns to night. Her face remained calm, but if someone looked closely, they would see something else in her eyes: memory. Perhaps she was remembering the first time she touched piano keys. Perhaps she was remembering someone who once sat beside her and guided her hands. The final notes approached slowly. She did not rush them. She allowed each one to breathe. Then, with one last soft chord, the music ended. Silence. Not the awkward silence from before. A full, heavy silence. For 2 seconds, no one moved. Then someone near the back began to clap. It was not loud at first, just steady and sincere. Another person joined. Within moments, the cafe filled with applause. The college students who had laughed earlier were now clapping the hardest. The girl opened her eyes slowly, as if waking from a dream. She looked around, almost confused by the reaction. She stood up from the bench and gave a small, polite bow. The cafe owner walked toward her. His face no longer carried doubt. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked quietly. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "At home," she said simply. He looked at the old piano, then back at her. That didn't sound like practice from nowhere. She gave a small smile. "My father used to fix broken instruments. People threw them away. He would bring them home. Some worked, some didn't, but he taught me on all of them." A few customers were listening closely now. "And now?" the owner asked. She lowered her eyes slightly. "Now I just play whenever I find a piano." He nodded slowly, as if understanding more than she had said. Without another word, he turned toward the kitchen and called out an order. A warm plate of food was prepared quickly. When he handed it to her, he did not place it in a takeaway box. "Sit," he said gently. "Eat here." She looked surprised. "Thank you, sir." As she carried the plate to a small table in the corner, people watched her with different eyes than before. Not with pity, not with amusement, but with respect. The college student who had laughed first stood up and walked over awkwardly. "Hey," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "That was really amazing." She nodded politely. "Thank you." He returned to his seat, quieter than before. The cafe slowly returned to its normal sounds, but something had changed. The air felt different. The old piano in the corner no longer looked like decoration, and the girl who had walked in asking for a piece of meal no longer looked invisible. She ate slowly, carefully, as if each bite mattered. She did not rush. She did not look around to see who was watching. When she finished, she carried her plate back to the counter and thanked the owner again. "Come back tomorrow," he said suddenly. She paused. "To play?" He nodded. "Yes, and not just for a meal." For the first time that evening, her calm expression softened into something warmer. "I will," she said. Then she picked up her old cloth bag, gave one last small nod to the room, and stepped outside into the cooling evening air. Behind her, the cafe door closed gently. Inside, people began talking again, but this time the topic was not jokes or gossip. It was her, and no one was laughing anymore. The next evening, the cafe felt different even before she arrived. The old upright piano in the corner had been cleaned. Someone had wiped the dust from its wooden surface. The keys had been gently polished. The small lamp above it, which had not worked in months, now glowed with a soft yellow light. The cafe owner stood near the counter, pretending to check receipts, but his eyes kept moving toward the door. Word had spread faster than he expected. A short video of her playing had been shared online. It was recorded by one of the college students who had laughed the day before. At first, he posted it as a joke. But after the music began in the video, the comments changed quickly. People asked who she was. Some wrote that they felt goosebumps. Others said they wanted to hear more. By afternoon, strangers had already begun asking about the girl who played for a piece of meal. Now, as the evening crowd gathered, there were more people than usual. Some customers ordered coffee and kept looking at the entrance. A few even chose tables closer to the piano. The owner tried not to show his nervousness. He had not planned any event. He had not put up posters. He had only said, "Come back tomorrow." The door opened. She stepped in quietly, just like the night before. But this time, heads turned immediately. The laughter from yesterday was gone. Instead, there was a soft whisper that moved across the room. "That's her. She's here." She looked slightly confused by the attention. She wore the same faded sweater, the same worn shoes. Her old cloth bag still hung over her shoulder. The owner walked toward her before she reached the counter. "You came," he said, and this time his voice carried warmth. "I said I would," she replied gently. He nodded and gestured toward the piano. "It's ready." She noticed the clean surface and the working lamp. Her fingers brushed lightly over the wood again. A small, quiet smile appeared on her face. "Thank you," she said. Before sitting down, she glanced around the cafe. There were more people than yesterday. Some looked curious. Some looked serious. A few held their phones ready, but not in a mocking way this time. She placed her bag beside the bench and sat down. The room slowly fell silent on its own. No one announced her. No one asked for quiet. But the air felt expectant. She rested her hands above the keys for a moment. Then she began. This time, the first note was stronger. It did not sound shy. It did not sound uncertain. It sounded like someone who had returned with purpose. The melody she chose was different from the night before. Started softly, almost like a question. The higher keys carried a gentle sound, like light rain tapping against a window. People leaned forward slightly. Her left hand joined in, steady and deep. The music slowly grew fuller. The sound filled every corner of the cafe. The college students from yesterday sat at the same table, but they were not joking now. One of them lowered his phone and simply listened. An elderly woman near the window closed her eyes. The cafe owner stood still behind the counter, not moving, not blinking much. He felt something strange in his chest, a mix of pride and disbelief. As the melody continued, her hands moved with more confidence than before. She was no longer proving herself. She was sharing something. The music rose into a stronger section, carried energy almost like determination. Each note was placed carefully, but there was power behind it. It was hard to believe that someone who had asked for food the night before could create something so rich and alive. Outside, a few passers-by slowed down when they heard the music through the door. Some peeked through the window and decided to step inside. The cafe was nearly full now. Her fingers moved faster, but not carelessly. Every movement had control. Every transition was smooth. At one point, the melody softened again, like a quiet memory returning. The sound became gentle and emotional, not sad exactly, but thoughtful. One man at a table near the back wiped his eyes discreetly. He did not fully understand why the music touched him so deeply, but it did. She played as if the piano was the only thing in the room. Her face remained calm, but her eyes showed focus and feeling. It was clear that this was not just practice for her. It was part of who she was. The piece reached its highest moment. Strong chords, clear rhythm, steady power. For a second, it felt like the walls of the cafe had expanded. Then, slowly, she guided the melody downward. The sound softened. The rhythm slowed. The final notes came gently, like footsteps fading into distance. When the last chord echoed and disappeared, the silence returned. But this time it lasted only a heartbeat. Applause burst out immediately. louder than before. Some people even stood up. She looked slightly overwhelmed. Her eyes moved across the room, unsure where to focus. The cafe owner walked toward her again, clapping as he approached. "That was even better than yesterday," he said honestly. She stood and gave a small bow. A man from a nearby table stepped forward. He was dressed simply, but there was something confident in the way he carried himself. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Do you take lessons anywhere?" She shook her head. "No." "Have you ever played in a concert hall?" "No," she answered again, her voice steady. He nodded slowly. "You should." She did not reply immediately. She seemed unsure what to say to that. More customers approached her. They did not crowd her, but they wanted to speak, to ask questions. "How long have you been playing? Who taught you? Can you play classical music?" She answered each question simply. She did not exaggerate. She did not try to impress anyone. She spoke about her father teaching her with broken instruments. She spoke about practicing alone. She spoke about finding pianos wherever she could. No complaints. No dramatic words. Just truth. The owner cleared his throat gently. "Everyone," he said, raising his voice slightly. "From today, she is not playing here for a piece of meal." A few people smiled. "She will play here every evening this week," he continued, "and we will treat her like the musician she is." The room filled with approving murmurs. She looked surprised. "Sir, I don't want to cause trouble." "You're not causing trouble," he replied. "You're bringing life into this place." Later that evening, after most of the customers had left, she remained seated at a small table, finishing a warm bowl of soup. The owner sat across from her. "I need to ask you something," he said gently. "Where do you stay?" She hesitated. "I rent a small room not far from here." He nodded. "And you practice?" "Whenever I find a piano," she answered. "Sometimes at a church. Sometimes at a community center. Sometimes nowhere." He was quiet for a moment. "You can practice here in the mornings," he said finally. "Before we open." Her eyes widened slightly. "Really?" He nodded. The piano shouldn't sit silent anymore. For the first time since she had walked into his cafe, she looked close to tears. But she blinked them away quickly. "Thank you," she whispered. As she left that night, the street felt less cold. Inside the cafe, the owner stood alone for a moment, staring at the piano. Yesterday, he had almost turned her away. Today, he felt grateful that he hadn't. Outside, a few people were still talking about her performance. Someone mentioned sharing another video. Someone else said they would bring friends tomorrow. But she walked quietly down the street, her old cloth bag resting against her side, her steps calm and steady. She had asked for a piece of meal. Now something much bigger had begun, and the laughter from the first night felt like it belonged to another lifetime. The mornings at the cafe were usually quiet. Before the doors opened to customers, the only sounds were the soft sweep of a broom, the hum of the coffee machine warming up, and the distant noise of traffic outside. Now there was something new. Music. On the third morning after her return, she sat alone at the old upright piano while sunlight slipped through the front windows. The cafe owner had unlocked the door early for her. He did not speak much when she arrived. He simply nodded toward the piano and went about preparing the shop. She placed her bag down and sat at the bench as if it had always belonged to her. The first notes she played that morning were not loud or dramatic. They were slow scales rising and falling. Her fingers moved carefully, warming up, touching each key with respect. The cafe felt different when it was empty. There was no audience, no applause, no whispers, just her and the instrument. For a moment, her calm expression changed. The quiet allowed memories to surface more clearly. She was no longer in the cafe. She was back in a small, cramped room many years ago. The paint on the walls had been peeling. The windows were narrow, letting in thin lines of light. In the corner of that room stood a broken piano someone had thrown away. Several keys did not work. The wood had cracks. One leg was slightly uneven. But to her, it had been the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Her father had dragged it home on a small cart. He repaired instruments for a living, guitars with snapped strings, violins with cracked bodies, flutes that no longer made sound. People brought him things they thought were useless. Sometimes he fixed them. Sometimes he used parts from one to repair another. He did not earn much money, but he carried pride in his work. The day he brought home that broken piano, she had asked, "Does it still sing?" He smiled and replied, "Every instrument sings, if someone listens closely." He spent weeks fixing what he could. Some keys would never work again, but many did. He showed her how to sit properly, how to curve her fingers, how to press a key gently instead of hitting it. "Do not fight the piano," he used to say. "Talk to it." At first, she did not understand. But slowly, she learned that music was not about pressing keys hard. It was about feeling the sound travel through your hands. Back in the cafe, her fingers paused for a second as the memory faded. She took a slow breath and continued practicing. The owner watched from behind the counter, pretending not to stare. By evening, the cafe filled again. More people came each day now. Some had seen the videos online. Others had heard about her from friends. A few local bloggers had written small posts about the girl who played for a meal. She did not read any of it. When she entered that evening, there was polite applause even before she touched the piano. It made her slightly uncomfortable. She did not want to become a spectacle. She sat down and began playing a gentle piece, one her father had taught her long ago. Started simple, almost like a lullaby. The melody carried warmth, like someone humming softly at night. As she played, more memories returned. Her father would sit beside her on a wooden chair, tapping a slow rhythm on his knee. Sometimes he closed his eyes while she practiced, not to sleep, but to listen carefully. "If you miss a note," he would say kindly, "do not stop." Music does not stop because of one mistake. There had been evenings when the electricity failed. The room would grow dark, lit only by a small candle. She would still practice even if she could barely see the keys. Her fingers learned to remember their places without her eyes. "Trust your hands," her father would tell her. "They are smarter than you think." One winter, business became slow. Fewer people came to repair instruments. Money was tight. Some days they shared one simple meal. But he never sold the piano. "This is not for selling," he once said firmly. "This is for building." She had not understood what he meant at the time. Years later, when illness slowly took his strength, he could no longer repair instruments. The room grew quieter. The piano became their main sound. She played for him every evening. Sometimes he would smile faintly. Sometimes he would simply listen in silence. The last piece she ever played for him was soft and hopeful. She had believed hope could fix anything. But life does not always move with music. After he was gone, the room felt empty. The piano felt heavier. For a while, she could not touch it. Each key carried too many memories. Eventually, the landlord sold the small house. She had to leave. The broken piano was too large to carry. She stood in the doorway that last day, staring at it. She pressed one final chord before walking away. Back in the cafe, her hands moved across the keys with deeper emotion now. The customers did not know the full story behind each note, but they felt something real. The melody shifted into a stronger rhythm, almost like determination rising after loss. After her performance ended that evening, a young woman approached her. "I heard you learned from your father," the woman said gently. "Was he a musician?" She nodded. "He repaired instruments. That was his music." The woman smiled. "You carry his work forward." She thought about that sentence long after the woman returned to her seat. Later that week, the man who had spoken to her earlier, the one who had asked if she had ever played in a concert hall, returned. This time, he introduced himself properly. He worked with a small community arts center across town. They hosted local performances, workshops, and small concerts. "We would like to invite you to visit," he said, "just to see the place. No pressure." She hesitated. Large rooms and formal settings felt far from her world. "I don't have proper clothes," she admitted quietly. He smiled. "We are not inviting your clothes. We are inviting your music. The cafe owner listened from nearby, pretending to organize cups. You should go, he said firmly. She looked at him, unsure. You asked me for a piece of meal, he continued softly. Now people are asking you for a piece of your music. That means something. That night, after the cafe closed, she stayed behind for a few extra minutes. She touched the keys lightly without playing a full song. Her journey had never been planned. She had never imagined sitting in a cafe with people waiting just to hear her play. She had only wanted food that first night. But music had opened a door she did not know was there. As she walked back to her small rented room, she thought about her father's words. This is for building. Maybe he had not meant building houses or fixing instruments. Maybe he had meant building strength, building courage, building a path that did not exist before. The next morning, she returned early to practice again. Sunlight filled the cafe. The owner handed her a cup of tea before she even asked. She sat at the piano and began working on a new piece. It was more challenging than the others. Faster, more complex. Her fingers stumbled once. She almost stopped. Then she remembered. Music does not stop because of one mistake. She continued. Outside, the city moved as always, busy, loud, unaware of the quiet determination growing inside a small cafe. Inside, a girl who once asked for a piece of meal was slowly building something far greater. And for the first time in a long while, the future did not feel empty. Felt like a melody still waiting to be played. The invitation to visit the community arts center stayed in her mind for days. She continued playing at the cafe every evening. The crowd grew larger, but the space felt warmer now, not crowded in a heavy way. People came early to get seats close to the piano. Some brought friends. A few regular customers started calling her our pianist, which made her smile shyly every time. But deep inside, she felt nervous about what was coming next. One afternoon, the cafe owner handed her a small folded paper. It had the address of the art center written neatly. They are expecting you tomorrow, he said. Her hands tightened slightly around the paper. What if I'm not ready? He leaned against the counter and looked at her carefully. Ready for what? For something bigger, she answered quietly. He shook his head gently. You were ready the first night you walked in here. You just didn't know it. The next day, she stood outside the art center building. It was larger than the cafe, with tall glass doors and wide steps leading up to the entrance. A banner near the door showed photos of past performances. Singers, dancers, small bands. She almost turned back. Her sweater was clean but still simple. Her shoes were still worn. She felt small standing in front of such a place. Then she remembered the broken piano in her childhood home. That had been small too. And yet it had held music just as strong as any grand instrument. She took a slow breath and stepped inside. The lobby was bright. The walls displayed paintings made by local artists. A soft echo filled the space, different from the cozy sound of the cafe. The man who had invited her spotted her quickly and waved. His smile was welcoming, not formal. I'm glad you came, he said. She nodded. Thank you for inviting me. He led her through a hallway toward a medium-sized hall. It was not a giant concert venue, but it was larger than any room she had ever played in. Rows of seats faced a small stage. On that stage stood a polished grand piano. She stopped walking, her eyes fixed on it. It looked beautiful. Smooth black surface, long elegant body, clean white keys that almost shone under the lights. I've never played on something like that, she admitted. He smiled. Then today is your first time. They walked up the small steps to the stage. The hall was empty except for a few staff members adjusting lights. The quiet felt heavier than the cafe silence. Carried expectation. She approached the piano slowly, almost carefully, as if afraid to disturb it. Take your time, he said softly. She placed her fingers lightly on the edge of the instrument. The surface felt cool and smooth. When she lifted the lid slightly, the strings inside caught the light. She sat down at the bench. For a moment, she just looked at the keys. They were wider than the old upright at the cafe. The petals shone at her feet. The bench felt steady. "What would you like to play?" he asked gently from the front row. She thought for a second. Then she decided not to choose something safe. She would play the piece she had been practicing in the mornings, the one that challenged her. Her fingers hovered above the keys. The first note sounded different here. Fuller. Stronger. It echoed softly through the hall and returned to her ears in a way she had never experienced before. She almost smiled. She continued. The melody moved carefully at first, as she adjusted to the touch of the grand piano. The keys responded quickly. The sound carried farther. Every small mistake would be clearer here. But something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling exposed, she felt free. The music grew stronger. The hall responded to her playing, wrapping the sound around her and sending it back richer than before. The staff members who were adjusting lights slowly stopped what they were doing. One of them leaned against the wall, listening. The man who had invited her sat quietly in the front row, hands folded. Her hands moved with more confidence now. The difficult section approached, the fast passage she had stumbled on earlier in the week. For a split second, doubt entered her mind. What if she missed it? Then she remembered her father's voice. Music does not stop because of one mistake. She pressed forward. Her fingers flew across the keys, steady and controlled. The notes flowed smoothly. No hesitation. The sound filled the hall beautifully. When she reached the final chord, it echoed softly and faded slowly into silence. The silence in the hall felt different from cafe silence. It was deeper, almost respectful. The man in the front row stood up slowly and clapped once. Then again. "That," he said, walking toward the stage, "is exactly why we invited you." She looked down at her hands, almost surprised at what they had just done. "We have a small concert next month," he continued. "Local performers. Nothing too large. We would like you to play." Her heart began beating faster. "A concert?" she repeated quietly. "Yes, you would not be alone. There will be other musicians too. But we would like to feature you." She felt both excitement and fear at the same time. "I don't know if I belong on a stage like this," she said honestly. He shook his head gently. "You already stood on this stage. And the music did the rest." She looked around the hall again. The empty seats no longer looked intimidating. They looked like possibilities. That evening at the cafe, she told the owner about the invitation. He stopped wiping a cup midair. "A concert?" She nodded slowly. He broke into a wide smile. Of course you will do it." "What if I fail?" she asked. He placed the cup down carefully. "Do you remember the first night here?" She did. "You walked in asking for food. People laughed. And then," he said. "And then I played," she answered softly. "And did you fail?" She shook her head. He leaned forward slightly. "The stage is just a bigger room. The piano is still the same friend." That night, when she played at the cafe, something inside her felt different. There was a quiet strength in her posture. Not pride, not arrogance, just belief. The customers sensed it too. The music carried more depth, more story. It felt like a bridge between where she had been and where she might go. After the performance, an elderly man approached her slowly. "I have attended many concerts in my life," he said. "Big halls, famous names. But sometimes the purest music is found in small places." She smiled gently. "Thank you. You remind me," he continued, "that talent does not need fancy walls to exist." His words stayed with her long after he left. Over the next weeks, she divided her time between morning practice at the cafe and afternoon sessions at the arts center. She learned how to adjust to stage lighting, how to bow properly, how to walk onto a stage without rushing. But she never changed the way she played. The music still came from the same place, from memories, from discipline, from quiet resilience. One evening, as she finished a powerful piece at the cafe, the applause felt stronger than ever. But this time she did not feel overwhelmed. She felt ready. The laughter from that first night had disappeared completely from everyone's memory. In its place stood respect, admiration, and something even deeper, connection. As she packed her old cloth bag after closing time, the cafe owner spoke quietly. "No matter how big the stage becomes," he said, "this corner will always be yours." She looked at the old upright piano, its wood still scratched but shining under the lamp. She touched one key softly, letting it ring once. "I'll never forget where it started," she replied. Outside, the night air felt cool and calm. The city lights flickered gently. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn sounded, and life moved forward as always. But inside her, something had shifted. She was no longer just the girl who played for a piece of meal. She was becoming the musician who turned laughter into silence. And soon, that silence would fill a much larger room. The days moved faster as the concert date came closer. The art center placed her name on a small poster near the entrance. Seeing it printed there felt unreal. She stood in front of it one afternoon, staring quietly. Her name looked different in bold letters, as if it belonged to someone more important. She touched the edge of the poster gently, almost to make sure it was real. At the cafe, the regular customers were excited. Some said they had already bought tickets. Others promised to come and support her. The college students who once laughed now spoke about her with pride, as if they had discovered her first. But with the excitement came pressure. At night, when she returned to her small rented room, doubts sometimes grew louder than applause. What if her hands shook? What if she forgot a section? What if the big hall made her feel small again? She would sit on the edge of her narrow bed and press her fingers lightly against her palm, imagining the piano keys. Sometimes she practiced silently on the table, tapping out the rhythm. The morning practices at the cafe became longer. The owner opened the doors earlier just for her. He never rushed her. Sometimes he brought tea without saying a word and left it beside the piano. One morning, after she finished a difficult section, she let out a small sigh of frustration. "It wasn't clean," she murmured. The owner, who had been arranging chairs, looked up. "It sounded beautiful to me." "It wasn't perfect," she replied. He walked closer and leaned against the piano. "Do you know why people come here to listen?" She shook her head. "They don't come for perfect," he said gently. "They come for honest." His words stayed with her. At the art center, rehearsals felt more serious now. The hall lights were adjusted. The sound was tested. Other performers practiced their pieces too. A violinist, a small vocal group, a young guitarist. She listened to them carefully. They were talented, skilled, confident. For a moment, she felt like she did not belong among them. During a short break, the violinist approached her. "You're the one from the cafe, right?" he asked kindly. She nodded. "I saw a video of you," he said. "You play with a lot of feeling." She lowered her eyes slightly. "Thank you." He smiled. "That's harder than playing fast notes." That simple sentence eased something inside her. The night before the concert, she could not sleep easily. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of traffic outside her window. She thought about her father. She imagined him sitting in the back row of the hall, arms crossed, nodding quietly. The image gave her comfort. The next evening, the art center was filled with soft chatter. People walked through the doors holding tickets. Some dressed formally. Others came in simple clothes. The atmosphere felt special, but not distant. Backstage, she stood near a curtain, listening to the opening performance. Her hands felt slightly cold. She rubbed them together gently. The man who had invited her months ago walked over. "Nervous?" he asked with a small smile. "Yes," she admitted. "That's good," he replied. She looked confused. "Good. It means you care." He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Just remember the cafe." She nodded slowly. When her turn came, her name was announced clearly. The sound of it echoed lightly through the hall. For a second, everything felt quiet. Then she walked onto the stage. The lights were brighter than during rehearsal. The audience looked like a sea of faces, slightly blurred by the glow. She sat at the grand piano and adjusted the bench carefully. She placed her feet on the pedals and rested her fingers on the keys. The silence in the hall felt heavy, but not unfriendly. She took a slow breath. The first note rang out, carried smoothly across the room, strong and steady. The nervousness in her chest began to settle as the melody unfolded. The hall responded beautifully, just as it had during rehearsal. She moved into the second section of the piece, the one she had practiced the most. Her fingers felt sure. The rhythm felt natural. Halfway through, she allowed herself to glance up briefly. In the third row, she saw the cafe owner sitting straight, hands folded. His expression was serious, focused. When their eyes met for a split second, he gave a small nod. She looked back at the keys, her confidence growing. The music rose into a powerful passage. Her hands moved quickly but clearly. Each note landed with purpose. The hall felt alive with sound. Then came the softer section. The melody turned gentle, almost fragile. The audience leaned in without realizing it. She poured everything into those quiet notes. The small room with peeling paint, the broken piano, the evenings lit by candlelight, the first night in the cafe when laughter filled the air. All of it became music. When she reached the final chord, she held it just long enough for the sound to settle into the space. Then silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. And then the applause began. Started strong and grew louder. Some people stood. The sound filled the hall, warm and overwhelming. She stood slowly and bowed. For a moment, she felt tears pressing behind her eyes, but she blinked them away gently. She walked off stage, her steps steady but light. Backstage, the performers congratulated her. The violinist smiled widely. The guitarist gave her a thumbs up. "You were amazing," someone whispered. She smiled shyly, still trying to process what had just happened. Later, after the concert ended and the audience began leaving, several people approached her in the lobby. An older woman told her the performance reminded her of her childhood. A young student asked how long she had been playing. A couple thanked her for the emotional experience. She answered each person kindly, her voice calm. When the crowd finally thinned, the cafe owner approached her slowly. "You didn't just play," he said quietly. "You told your whole story." She looked down at her hands again. "I was afraid," she admitted. He smiled gently. "And you played anyway." Outside the arts center, the night air felt different from the 1 month ago when she had walked home with only a piece of meal. Now she carried something else. Belief. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, the man from the arts center joined her. "We have received calls already," he said. "Other small venues are interested." Her heart skipped slightly. "More performances?" "Yes," he nodded. "If you want." She looked up at the dark sky for a moment. She remembered the broken piano she had left behind years ago. She remembered asking for food with steady eyes. She remembered the laughter. "I want," she said softly. He smiled. "Good." That night, as she returned to her small rented room, she did not feel as small anymore. She sat at the table and placed her hands flat on the surface, imagining the keys beneath them. The journey was not finished, but she understood something clearly now. She had never been just a girl asking for a piece of meal. She had always been a musician waiting for someone to listen. And now the world was beginning to listen. The weeks after the concert felt like a quiet wave that kept moving forward. More invitations came, just as the man from the arts center had said. Small community halls, a local school event, a charity gathering. None of them were huge stages, but each one carried new faces and new ears ready to listen. She accepted carefully, not because she wanted attention, but because she felt responsible for the music now. It was no longer only hers. It belonged to the people who found comfort in it. Even with new places to play, she never stopped going back to the cafe. The old upright piano still stood in the corner under the small yellow lamp. Its wood was scratched, and one key still made a slightly softer sound than the others. But it felt like home. One evening, the cafe was especially full. Word had spread about her concert performance. Some customers who had attended it were telling others about the powerful silence in the hall, about the way the last note seemed to stay in the air. She walked in quietly, as she always did. But now, instead of whispers, there were warm smiles. The cafe owner greeted her with a simple nod, but his eyes showed pride. When she sat at the piano that night, she did not feel nervous anymore. She felt grateful. She began with a soft melody, something light and hopeful. The room slowly quieted. The sound wrapped around the tables and chairs, around the clinking cups and soft conversations, and turned them into stillness. As she played, she noticed something near the door. A young girl stood there, maybe 10 or 11 years old. Her clothes were simple, and her hair was tied in a loose ponytail. She was not with anyone. She stood just inside the entrance, watching with wide eyes. The performance ended with gentle applause. As people returned to their conversations, the young girl stepped closer to the piano. "Can you really make it sound like that?" she asked softly. She smiled. "The piano makes the sound. I just guide it." The girl hesitated. "I've never touched one." She moved slightly on the bench. "Would you like to?" The girl looked around nervously, as if asking silent permission from the room. "It's okay," the cafe owner called out kindly. "Go ahead." The girl stepped forward carefully. She reached out and pressed one key quickly, almost afraid it would break. The note rang out. Her eyes widened. She pressed another key, then another, creating uneven sounds that made her giggle. She watched the child with warmth in her eyes. "Try using both hands," she suggested gently. The girl placed her fingers awkwardly on the keys. The sounds were not smooth or musical, but they were full of curiosity. For a moment, she saw herself years ago, small hands on broken keys, learning without fear. After a few minutes, the girl stepped back. "I can't play like you," she said quietly. She shook her head softly. "I couldn't either the first day." The girl smiled shyly before hurrying back toward the door, where a woman who must have been her mother waited. That small moment stayed with her long after the cafe closed. Later that night, as she walked home, she realized something important. The music had given her more than food, more than applause. It had given her a way to reach people. Months passed, and her performances became more frequent. She was never suddenly famous. There were no giant billboards or flashing lights. But in her city, people knew her story. They remembered the girl who asked to play for a piece of meal. One afternoon, the Arts Center organized another concert, slightly larger than the first. This time, they asked her to close the event with the final performance. Backstage, she stood calmly, hands resting by her sides. The nervous fear that once filled her had turned into steady focus. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage with quiet confidence. The hall was full. She sat at the grand piano and looked at the audience for a brief second. Then she began. The piece she chose that night was new. It started softly, almost like a whisper. It carried pieces of her journey. The small room, the broken piano, the laughter in the cafe, the warm plate of food, the first applause, the nervous rehearsals, the growing belief. The melody grew stronger, then softer, then strong again. The audience listened without moving. When she reached the final section, she slowed down deliberately. Each note was clear and meaningful. She did not rush the ending. The last chord echoed across the hall and faded gently into silence. The silence lasted longer this time. It was not empty. It was full. Then applause filled the room, steady and sincere. She stood and bowed, her heart calm. After the concert, a small group of children approached her. One of them held a folded piece of paper. "This is for you," the child said. She opened it and saw a simple drawing of a piano with bright yellow stars around it. Underneath, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for playing." Her eyes softened. Later that evening, she returned to the cafe one more time. It was closing, chairs already placed upside down on tables. The owner looked surprised to see her. "I thought you would be celebrating," he said. She smiled. "This is where it started." He walked with her to the old upright piano. The lamp above it still glowed softly. She sat down and pressed one gentle chord. The sound was not as rich as the grand piano at the Arts Center, but it felt familiar, honest. "You've come a long way," the owner said quietly. She nodded. Because you let me play. He shook his head. Because you dared to ask. They both remembered that first night. The laughter, the doubt, the simple request for food. I was hungry, she said softly. And now? He asked. She thought for a moment. Now I'm full, she replied. Not just full from meals. Full from music. From connection. From the chance to turn a small opportunity into something larger. Before leaving, she touched the top of the old piano gently. I'll always come back, she said. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky. The air felt calm. As she walked down the street, she passed the spot where she had once paused before entering the cafe for the first time. She could almost see that earlier version of herself. Tired, unsure, but brave enough to speak. May I play for a piece of meal? Those words had changed everything. Not because someone gave her food, but because someone gave her a chance. And she had turned that chance into a melody that carried far beyond one small room. Her journey was still unfolding. There would be new stages, new listeners, new challenges. But one truth remained steady. No one who heard her play would ever laugh at a quiet request again. Because sometimes, behind the simplest question, there is a mastery waiting to be heard.